Hello, I'm Solly Ross, and this is the Kubernetes community meeting for March 1st, 2018. Quick reminder, this meeting is recorded, so don't say anything you wouldn't want your grandparents to hear. And with that, I'll send it over to our demo. Chuck Ha is giving a demo of Sonobui.
Cool, thank you. Let me just share my screen. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the tool Sonobui that we've been working on at Heptio. The high-level sentence is it's a framework for extracting cluster and workload information. And to make that a little bit more concrete, I wanted to go over a few use cases. So you might care about this because if you are providing a Kubernetes installation, you want to make sure that your Kubernetes installation is conformant with what people expect the appropriate features to be. So CNCF runs a Kubernetes certification program, and you can run the conformance tests with Sonobui. Sonobui will generate, or the conformance test will generate the files. You can get those files. Sonobui will give you a way to get those files. You can submit a PR to the CNCF, and if all the tests pass, you can put this little badge on your Kubernetes installer so that everybody knows that your installer is certified. Another thing is it's sometimes nice just to be able to run the conformance tests. And so this is actually just an easy way to, if you spin up a cluster, you can run your conformance tests, see what's working, what's not working, and figure out how to improve it. And security, something everybody cares about. There's a plugin that was not written by either anybody at Heptio or Aqua Security, but it's a Sonobui plugin that runs Kubebench, which is a set of security checks for your cluster. So you may care about one of these use cases. And how it works, I wanted to do a quick level overview of what's going on under the hood. There's three pieces to care about here. There's the configuration, which defines the plugins to run. You define the plugins you want to run, and you define the metadata queries you want to run. So you can collect information about your cluster, such as what pods are running, what namespaces exist, all sorts of different resource gathering. And you can also specify which plugins to run. Then the two actual pieces of infrastructure that get created are the aggregator, which is responsible for running the worker pods, running the worker pods and collecting the metadata from the cluster itself. And then the plugin worker is the thing that will be actually running the plugin container that's going to be running, say, the end-to-end tests or the systemd gathering container, and sending the responses back to the aggregator once the plugin is finished running. And the aggregator is the thing that will be running the queries for your metadata. So it'll query the Kubernetes API and gather all of the resources that you ask it to gather. And that's all configurable in the configuration file. So plugins are kind of interesting how they work. We've sort of broken plugins down into two different types of plugins. There's node-dependent plugins and node-independent plugins. So for the node-dependent plugins, it matters which node your plugin is running on. So if you're trying to gather all of the systemd logs on all of your nodes, you need a pod on every node. So we use a daemon set driver for that. And then if you're running, say, the end-to-end tests, it doesn't matter where they're running, just so long as there's one of them running. So we use a job driver for that. And once your plugins finish running, Sonobui provides you a tarball of all of the outputs. You'll get all of the results of all of your plugins, and you'll get the results of all of your queries in a big tarball of JSON and XML or whatever format your plugins are generating. And it's kind of unwieldy to look at, not super pretty. So we released a tool a little while ago called Scanner, which is a web interface to Sonobui. And it's nice. It's a nice way to get started because it gives you a predefined configuration, so you don't have to worry about configuring it yourself. And it's going to collect just enough information to populate the UI that you'll see at the end. And once it finishes running, you'll actually get to see a list of all the tests that run, which ones failed, get bubbled up to the top. And you can see what version of Kubernetes your cluster is running, how many nodes you're running on, and other such information. Unfortunately, it's not easily customizable. It is customizable, but it's not super easy to do. The data gets deleted after 90 days, which may or may not be a pro or con. And you can't really run it from an air-gapped environment because Kubernetes would need to talk to the scanner service. And I wanted to do a quick walkthrough of that with screenshots. So this is the main landing page for Scanner. It's scanner.heptio.com. You click on Scan Your Cluster. You get to this page, and you can copy and paste that kube control apply -f URL that everybody likes, and enable or disable RBAC depending on your cluster settings. And once it finishes running, you'll see this page, which shows you the results of your conformance tests. You can see here there's 125 that got run. They'll pass them all. If there was a failure, you would see the failures bubbled up to the top. And you can download the test report here as well to see if with enough, and that'll give you the files you need to pass the CNCF Kubernetes certification program. So we've been working for a long time on getting the next release out, and I wanted to highlight a couple of the features that we'll be releasing in the next month. One of the neat things we've been working on is HTTPS everywhere. So every Sonobuoy run will generate all the TLS certs needed to secure the communications between the plugin workers and the aggregator. It was not super well defined before, but now it's well defined and secure. We've come out with a command line interface, so you don't need to mess around with YAML directly unless you're doing some heavy customization. There's a couple of features here. You can generate the YAML, or you can just skip the generation and run in one of the predefined modes. So a quick mode to make sure that it's working, or a conformance to run all the conformance tests. And it gives you a way to inspect the output. We've made the plugin definitions easier to write, so hopefully it'll lower the barrier to entry for folks who want to write plugins, and just lots of bug fixes. Oh, and the Go client as well, so you can programmatically interface with the libraries if you like. So with that, I want to move on to the demo. Let's just share my other screen. Okay, so I have a new cluster that I've spun up. And we've got this help here. So we're just going to do a quick run. So you can say mode equals quick. And that will go and create a bunch of objects. So you can see it creates the namespace that it runs in, all the RBAC stuff that it needs to run the plugins and things like that. The config map, so this is the configuration, and then the actual aggregator pod and the service to communicate. So then we can also see the status, Sonobuoy status. So it says it's running. Runs can take up to 60 minutes. That's for conformance testing, but we've done just -- mode equals quick, so we can look at the logs. This is kind of an intense output, but here we go. Those errors are actually safe to ignore, but it's just about finished. So you can see if you read through the logs, you'll see that it launches the plugins and says it's waiting for the plugins to finish. Okay, so Sonobuoy status now tells it's complete, and we can use Sonobuoy retrieve to get the data. We have a tarball, and then we can take a look inside and see Sonobuoy E2E. Here's the tarball. And this shows no failed tests. And it shows that there was one passed test called pods should be submitted and removed. And so now we want to clean up Sonobuoy delete. And everything is gone. And then just quickly hop back to here. And that's the demo. If you would like to get involved, you can check out our issues board. There's a link to the slides in the community meeting notes, as well as the Sonobuoy repo. Ping us on Sonobuoy channel in the Kubernetes Slack. Please, we would love testers for our CLI because it's pretty new. And there are definitely edge cases that we want to iron out before the release. And we love feedback. This one major theme of this whole release is that we've based it on the feedback we've been hearing from folks in the community. So we really appreciate anybody taking the time to play with this and give us feedback. And that is all I've got.
Awesome. Do we have any questions for Chuck? Doesn't look like there's anything in the chat. Lots of cools and greats, though. So on to the release notes. So we'll start out with the 110 release note updates with Jace. Take it away, Jace.
All right, thank you so much. So we are in week 9 of 12 of the release schedule. And if you go to the meeting minutes for the community meeting, there is a link to the full schedule. This week, we began code freeze. We did a 24-hour postponement due to the fact that we had a problem that made the submit queue not work at optimal rate. So we had a lot of things back up. And one of the interesting things that we learned from having that 24-hour delay was that it made it easier to sort of get things tidied up and ready for code freeze. So I don't know if we really learned anything from that, but it certainly might be something that we look at how long we make for the code freeze transition for. So a little bit about why we do code freeze, because some of the parts of the release process are not necessarily totally obvious. Code freeze provides an opportunity for SIGs to focus on bugs and cleanup. And because the merge queue is only handling things related to the release at that time, writing new feature work and stuff it doesn't have as much value at that time, because you can't really merge it and do that. So this gives SIGs a chance to clean up, do bug fixes, other things like that. It also allows time for technical debt elimination within the release process itself. There's a link in the agenda to this thing that Ben Elder did to help clean up one of the labels around unit tests and in the pre-submits. And also a nice bit of optimization around time frame. So if you were getting 25-minute plus unit test run times before, you should be down to 5 or 6 minutes now, which is a very big improvement. And thank you, Ben, for that, and all the folks in SIG testing for the work you're doing. So the mechanisms of code freeze essentially is that we use labels to determine what is relevant to the release itself. The status approved for milestone label is the primary way we do that. The keepers of that are primarily SIGs, although in some cases the release team can add it. For example, after code freeze, I had to go through the 40, 50 odd approved NLGTM PRs that were not labeled that way in order to get them to merge. So there are cases where, as release leader, I have to go do that, or other members of the team will do it. But for the most part, if you're in a SIG and you want to make sure that something is getting the attention of the release team and making it into the release itself, that status approved for milestone label is the key to add there, and to make sure that it's in the 110 milestone. And if that label is set, you will also get some nagging from the bot about what labels you need to make are also assigned. So things that are in the release milestone that are in issues and are approved for milestone are considered release blocking. And so that gives SIGs, like I had mentioned a couple of meetings ago, the sort of proverbial stop chain to pull on a release if there's something that you feel is going to negatively impact our user community. And that is definitely everybody's right and duty to do if you feel like there's something that could negatively impact the release. So a beta went out late last night. Thank you, Caleb Miles, for doing that work. There's a link to the release in the meeting minutes as well. If you are able to, please check out that beta, do some work with it. If you run into issues, definitely file those and give us visibility, because that's one of our early signal points. The more people we get to use the beta, the better off we are. There's a link in the meeting minutes to the known issues aggregator. And so this allows us, if you're a SIG and you know that something is going to be going out of the release that has some impact, but it's in the will not fix category for whatever reason, or it's maybe a deprecation that has implications for existing versions, or whatever that looks like, this issue is how we track that stuff and make sure that it gets into the release notes. So if you know of something like that or suspect there's something like that, go ahead and put it in there just in case, so we can keep an eye on it. Lastly, release notes and user-facing documentation should be close to complete. PRs for docs, then that's user-facing docs, need to be ready for review by tomorrow. So usually if we have a deadline, Chris, it's at 6 p.m. Pacific. We try and give a full workday on deadline days. So if it's different than that, I'll definitely let people know. But for the most part, plan on 6 p.m. Pacific time to have those ready for review. And then if we want to get a jump on it this weekend, we can start looking at those. That's pretty much it for the 110 release. Is there any questions? Are there any questions, to be more grammatically correct? Okay. I put the next two updates in for the point releases that are coming out. 189 should be out today, and 1713 is out. There was a little bit of, I don't know, difficulty with the release process for 1713 for some reason. And the version or the information that actually went into the Kubernetes release version in GitHub doesn't have the full information, but Wojtek is working on sorting that out and wants everybody to know that he's on top of that. So we'll have more updates on that probably next week if need be. That's all I have. Thank you, everybody.
Awesome. All right. On to the graph of the week. Josh.
Okay. I'm going to try sharing my screen again, and if this doesn't work, then someone else is going to share it. Then Paris is going to share her screen. So let me see if this works. Okay, is that working? Are you seeing the notes for today?
We see a black screen.
Okay, that's not working then. Paris, if you could share your screen and click the first issues and PRs by milestone link. How do I stop sharing? Stop sharing. There we go.
Yeah, stop sharing first.
Okay.
Now you guys are see it.
This is a new graph that Lucas put together because
Now you guys won't be able to see it.
I can see it.
Oh, no, sorry, people in my crew.
Oh, got it.
I forgot to mute.
This is a new graph that Lucas put together because going into Code Slush, we were concerned with what seemed like a high number of open issues. And so I wanted to compare whether the number of open issues was actually high compared with previous releases. And it turns out that we had most of the information that we needed in the graph database, with a caveat that I'll explain in just a minute, so that we actually could compare them. So if you want to click that first link, the 110 link. So this is 110 a couple days after code freeze. And you can see on the graph, we have, see which one is issues. We have 30 odd issues open. All this shows is close to 40 and 40 odd PRs open. Now, there actually is a problem with those counts. In developing the graph, Lucas found out that the way that we track this data from GitHub is that GitHub sends out events for things that happen in a repository. And then those events are added to a time series database so that we can keep track of changes over time. It turns out that if you manually change a milestone, like you just remove a milestone from an issue, that does not generate an event. So we don't actually know that the issue has been taken out of the milestone for the graph until some other event happens to the issue, such as it being closed or a comment being added. we'll open a bug with GitHub about this, but it does mean that the counts I'm about to show you are a little high because they're effectively trailing reality by a few days. So if you want to click on the second link, the 1.9. Now, 1.9 was a short release, so you can see, again, a couple days after code freeze, that we had about slightly fewer open issues, a lot fewer open PRs against 1.9. Is what you'd expect out of a short release. So it's interesting that the balance of PRs and issues is flipped. So then let's take a look at another normal cycle release. Let's look at 1.8. Okay, and so this was our last normal cycle release. And in here you see the counts of both PRs and issues are actually much higher than they are for 1.10. This actually syncs up with some of the other graphs, because if you look at, and I didn't provide links for this, sorry. If you look at some of the other graphs that just look at activity, issue and PR activity in general, you'll actually see since the beginning of this year, activity in the project has been down compared to historically, compared to, say, November. Just January and February have been very slow. And as a result, we just have less stuff going on with 1.10 than we had going on with 1.8. So that's your graph of the week. Use it in good health, and like I said, keep in mind that business of it overcounting slightly, basically about 10%, because of trailing reality due to the GitHub event issue.
Awesome. That's really neat. It's always cool to be able to compare to past releases. All right, on to SIG updates. So we actually have 3 SIG updates today. The first is SIG Big Data.
You are officially unmuted.
Okay. From SIG Big Data, so in general, the theme of our SIG is to work on projects which are usually external and kind of bring the right combination of Kubernetes knowledge and knowledge of those external frameworks which are commonly used for big data computation in the Hadoop ecosystem. So 3 projects that we've been working on are Apache Spark, Airflow, and HDFS. So there's stuff happening on each of them. Apache Spark just released 2.3 yesterday, and that contained all of the stuff that we had worked on for the past year, which was initially in a fork and has now been upstreamed. And yeah, Paris have actually been helping us out with kind of transitioning from the Kubernetes governance model in our fork to the Apache world, which is like, if it doesn't happen in a mailing list, it just didn't happen at all. But it's a whole different. But yeah, in the process, we added 3 new ASF committers from our SIG, who will also be Spark committers. And yeah, in relation to that, we're working on like a Spark submit operator, which is bringing kind of Kubernetes semantics and Kubernetes style APIs on top of Spark itself. In other projects, we also have a group of people that are working on Airflow. Airflow is this really popular DAG scheduler that's used for composing data processing and data transformation pipelines. Airflow, the effort has actually been partially upstreamed at this point. You can, in the next release of Airflow, I think that's due in around March, you could actually pick it up and launch pods as part of your workflow and pretty much execute anything in those steps. We're also working on like a Kubernetes executor, which is going to bring, let Airflow run entirely on Kubernetes and not need like an additional cluster manager or separate nodes for it and so on. So there's blog posts on this coming up. And finally, on HDFS, there's a lot of hardening of existing work that's going on, which is like adding highly available name nodes and fault tolerance and things like that. I'd say success for this project looks like making it performant and secure and making HDFS on containers just as good as it is, let's say, a Yarn traditional Hadoop stack. Yeah, so there's a demo for that at SIG Apps coming soon. That's it.
Cool. Can you drop some links into the meeting notes too to some of that work?
Yep.
Honor, is it okay if I add a couple of things?
Yep, go ahead.
We've also been engaged a little bit with Kube Arbitrator. Klaus Ma has been working with us at a lower level so far, but he's been very eager to get community input on requirements for Arbitrator, and I don't know, we've hooked him up with like Kubeflow as one way to get that.
All right. Anybody have any more questions, comments, suggestions? All right. If not, we'll move on to SIG storage next.
All right. I've got a couple of slides. I'm going to share my screen real quick. Can everybody see that okay?
Yep, we can see you.
Cool. So for 1.10, SIG storage has been working on moving a lot of features from alpha to beta, specifically local storage API, which can be used to access node local storage, has been moved to beta. The CSI core API, which was introduced as alpha last quarter, has also been moved to beta. In doing so, we have the ability to allow you to control your file system type, specify other CSI parameters, and allow you to set share secrets with CSI drivers. This version snaps to CSI release 0.2, and there's more details in that link. There were some features that we were hoping to get into beta that weren't able to get in. We're going to continue to work on those next quarter. Associated with CSI is mount propagation. It's a feature that allows privileged containers to be able to set up bidirectional R-shared mounts. This is important for external volume drivers that get deployed as containers, so that the mounts that they create inside the container are actually propagated to the host machine. So we moved that feature to beta as well. Ephemeral storage request limit API has moved to beta. This allows you to set limits on how much space your container can use from the local machine for things like container logs, overlay, FS, the images, things like that. And then finally, we've added the ability to prevent volume objects from being deleted out of order. So for example, if you have a bound PVC, we added finalizers to the PVC, so it blocks deletion of the PVC object until the PV is deleted. And similarly, the PVC won't be deleted until the pods that are referencing it are deleted. In addition to moving a bunch of features to beta, we've been working on designing new features. The biggest feature that we're looking at right now is coming up with topology-aware volume scheduling. This will allow the scheduler to actually influence where volumes are provisioned. Today, that decision is made completely independently, and this is going to be pretty powerful when it comes out. Associated with that is coming up with a mechanism that Kubernetes can use to handle topology more generically, both within Kubernetes and CSI. And by topology, I mean things like regions, zones, racks. We want to come up with some semantic that allows us to be able to specify these things without actually hard coding any of them. So keep an eye out for that design. And then finally, we're continuing to work on the snapshots design, figuring out how it's going to integrate with CSI. and looking into the API for what restore would look like for snapshots. What's next for storage SIG? So before 1.10 is cut, it's going to be focused on testing, bug fixing, and documentation. And then in the next quarter, in the next couple quarters for 1.11, 1.12, we're going to start driving these beta features towards GA and stable. We want to make sure that we don't get stuck in beta indefinitely. We're also planning a series of videos to help onboard new contributors within the SIG. That kind of leads to the next slide, which is how do you get involved? We have bi-weekly meetings. There's a link here and a link to the notes. Bi-weekly means every 2 weeks. There is a Slack channel you can jump in and ask for help on. We're going to be at KubeCon EU and presenting an intro to the storage SIG session there if you're going to be at KubeCon. And finally, we hold face-to-face meetings regularly every 1 or 2 quarters to have intensive design discussions and close on some of the more contentious designs. We're planning our next one for somewhere around April. Join the meetings to get involved with that. And that's all from Storage SIG.
All right, any questions for SIG storage? All right, and with that, last but certainly not least, on to SIG Multi Cluster.
All right, I'll give the update for SIG Multi Cluster. We recently updated the community repo to kind of reflect what the ongoing projects are within the SIG because it's not federation anymore. There's four branches of projects. First, I'll address the federation code, which was moved out of tree during 1.9. I mentioned this because we haven't done an update in a little bit. The net effect of that was the kubefed binary, which is used to bootstrap the federation control plane, mysteriously disappeared from 1.9. So that caused some user confusion because essentially the documentation on how to start a federation control plane did not work. So there is ongoing work within the repo to be able to rebuild it out of core. But to be honest, I think the next steps are somewhat unclear. If you follow what's going on in the repo, the bots are auto-closing a lot of stale bugs. There's a low interest in fixing open issues right now. And a lot of the discussions around where Federation is at has moved to a separate working group called Federation V2. So I think I'd want to bring that up with maybe SIG PM as to where that leaves our users. On the community site, I've tried to clarify where the effort is going. But for example, if you go to the top level documentation page, it would be nice to at least have a note that says what the status of the project is. Just to be fair to our users, if you're a Kubernetes user, you can expect to have a GA experience on a single cluster, but that's certainly not the case in a federated cluster. So at least a label would be nice, and maybe fork out the documentation to a separate site. What I can speak to for the Federation V2, which is the working group, it's kind of a brainstorming phase. 2 people are working on prototypes to inform the direction of newer multi-cluster APIs. I guess what's most relevant for people who have been following Federation for a while is that the group is slowly moving away from a one-to-one API compatibility between what is Kubernetes API on a single cluster and its variant in once it's federated. So efforts right now are trying to get agreement around distributing Kubernetes API-like resources to member clusters through templates, overrides, and how to propagate status. So essentially what that means is before in the Federation V1, per specific types, specific overrides on types were buried in annotations. And right now the effort is to try to formalize that through templates, potentially CRDs. The two other projects that are worth mentioning for the update, one is called Cluster Registry. It's in a standalone repository. And right now it maintains lists of Kube API servers, which for the community here would be clusters. But I guess I should mention that we've had other projects like Istio reach out and consume this API to be able to use the cluster registry to do Istio multi-control plane. So essentially their version of multi-cluster for Istio. So that's why I guess I'm specifying that these are lists of Kube API servers because Istio uses Kube API servers and not necessarily Kubernetes clusters. The goal for that project is to get to agreement on the API to be able to go to beta this quarter. The last ongoing project within the SIG is called Kube MCI. MCI stands for Multi-Cluster Ingress. It kind of has two sub-projects. One is, the first is a command line-based tool to be able to configure multi-cluster ingresses. So this would be an ingress definition that spans multiple clusters. And the idea there is to hook it up to the cluster registry, so the other project, to be able to do label-based cluster selection to be able to deploy ingresses across multiple clusters. So the first phase is to be a command line tool, and then the second phase is to be able to have a controller, so an operator type pattern that can watch ingresses and watch cluster registries, so lists of clusters, and to deploy ingresses that way. That's the end of my update.
Great.
Okay.
Any questions for SIG Multi Cluster? If not, then we will move on to announcements. So I think the first announcement we have is about changes to the owner-maintainer role.
Yeah, I can give that. Background is that we have this maintainer role on the ladder, and it's always had a to-do figure out like if we need this and why it exists. And it primarily existed because there were a couple things that you couldn't do with Git comments that you needed write access to the Kubernetes repo for. Through automation, we've closed those gaps. And so the direct Kubernetes write access is not required for most maintenance day-to-day. In addition, the project has grown in scope, where creating a role that holistically is responsible for the health of the project in every capacity and every sub-area is not really feasible or a practical approach. And instead, the holistic maintenance should be scoped to and focused on specific sub-areas of the project. So the proposal here is to take those responsibilities that currently are in this maintainer's rung of the ladder and to fold them into owners, which are scoped to specific areas of the project.
Awesome.
So if you don't have write access and you weren't planning on getting it, this doesn't affect you at all. It just actually is a win for you because now you can probably do things that were harder to do before, and you have a better direct route to ownership of sub areas of the project.
Cool. It's always good to be able to do more stuff via the bot commands and not need to go bug someone who has higher level access. Also, a reminder to people, if you want to see what the bot commands are and how to use them, there's a nice web page on the Kubernetes website. If you go to prow.kates.io and click on the menu, there's a command link there. All right. Next up, we have some reminders about the Kubernetes Contributor Summit and KubeCon. So I can give those unless Paris wants to.
Sure. Reminder that the Contributor Summit is happening a day before KubeCon Copenhagen, which is May 1st. The registration for that is now open. There is a link in the doc. The registration this year is actually on the KubeCon website as a co-located event. It is a Google form. It is free. You do not have to attend KubeCon for that to go. We will have multiple tracks there. This year, one track aimed at new contributors, the other track aimed at current contributors. And then also there is a KubeCon price increase as of March 9th, and the ticket link is inside of there. I'll also grab the next one too, Solly, if that's okay. We are having our next Meet Our Contributors series. We had our first one last month, and we'll do it again every first Wednesday of every month. We'd like to do it more, but that's what we're starting with right now. This is an Ask Us Anything session, very similar to user office hours, but with contributors on the line. We do have two times to make that friendly to different time zones, 3:30 p.m. and 9 p.m. UTC. Check that out for your time zone conversion. Ask questions on the Meet Our Contributors Slack channel. And we would also like to open up to live peer code reviews. So if you have a code review that you would like to be reviewed by a peer, please get that in at least 24 hours before, so we can make sure that we have someone that is keen on that area that will help you with that. We'll also probably do a live docs review as well, so you can see how the docs team goes through and does tech reviews and things like that. So that's a very cool process and program that we've got going on. Always welcoming new volunteers for that too. All information is in the doc.
Awesome. All right. And finally, we've got some shout outs. So this section, for people who haven't heard it yet, is where we give kudos to people who are particularly helpful in the project. You can nominate people in the shoutouts channel on Slack. So there were no nominations this week, but I am going to go over the top 5 responders in the Kubernetes Slack overflow tag, because seriously, you guys are awesome helping answer people's questions about how to work with Kubernetes. Very important. So we have Radek, Aerokite, Vikram, Jonah, and Fyun Shinho. Thank you guys very much, and keep up the good work. And that's it for the agenda this week. Does anybody have any additional last-minute announcements, things they forgot to add, things that they want to say? All right, well, if nobody has anything to add, then I'll give everybody back 17 minutes. Have a good week, and see you next Thursday.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you for hosting.